I will be talking today about the power of language on our thinking and the silencing of women. A few days ago, I took my daughter for a COVID test. Turned out negative, by the way. We had to fill out an online form which asked for her gender. And there were two options, MR, so Mr., and MX, which I don't even know how to pronounce. And there was no way to get the test without filling in the form and choosing one of the two. So begrudgingly, I selected MX, not knowing what it meant. She's a minor, she is female, and she is now listed in the database of the government as MX. In the past few weeks, we've seen an uptick in a phenomenon that has been seeping into our language for decades, the erasure of words designating female from our language, and their replacement by ideologically driven language. I think you've all seen the examples from UN Women, and I'm not going to go into that too much. I know Jimena is going to mention a few examples from Argentina as well. When I first learned about the issues of transgender people, it was about 6 years ago, I was hugely sympathetic to their plight. I felt I needed to stand up for this small minority of people who were suffering from what was referred to as gender dysphoria. And while I was aware of cross-dressers, transvestites, and transsexuals, this notion of transgender people was new to me. And rather than men who like to dress up as women or who get surgery to look like women, these were men who said they had a deeply felt sense of actually being women. They would call it a female essence, a female soul, or something like that. And even though I am a woman, I didn't understand what that meant. It felt strange and intangible. But I was told that that was because I was a cisgender woman, meaning a woman who was happy with the body she was born in and who didn't suffer like a transgender woman. I was told this was my gender identity. This didn't feel exactly right, but I went along with it. I checked my privilege and I educated myself as I was told to do. And this was the first time I was confronted with this new language that was foreign to me, and I felt compelled to adopt it. After all, I needed to be respectful of this oppressed group and use their preferred language. And I even told people to refer to a teenager who had taken his own life, to refer to him as by his preferred pronouns, because if in life he thought he was a girl, he was a girl. I did often, like Caroline also mentioned, get mixed up as I tried to use the preferred pronouns for people, but I continue to make an effort. However, as I educated myself, I became aware of feminists who were critical of this phenomenon in a very civil and eloquent way, and I saw them get slashed down by the men I was supposed to see as women. I saw men who claimed to be women posting pictures of their penises online, threatening women, generally displaying classic male abusive behavior, and doubt set in. You will have noticed I have made use of air quotes in what I've just said, and that's because every time I use these air quotes, this was new language to me, language that I didn't really understand, but accepted on faith. So terms like gender identity, gender dysphoria, transgender, cisgender. And as I started to question if these men were really so oppressed, because they were actually being quite abusive. So I'm talking about men here because they're the ones who dominate the conversation and the women are practically invisible. I also started to question if they really felt that they were women. I had never really regarded them as women, but until then I had accepted that they genuinely felt they were. But I started to doubt this now, and I recognize elements from abusive relationships in their behavior. I think this links into what Caroline was saying about the narcissistic behavior. Lying, intimidation, gaslighting, narcissism, entitlement, exploitation, including financially, abuse, demeaning and ridiculing behavior, demands for full submission. When I was myself in an abusive relationship, I gradually started to censor myself and keep my thoughts and feelings to myself in order not to anger my partner. And after many years of doing this, I practically forgot what my own thoughts and feelings were because I hadn't expressed them for so long. And not finding my own words meant I wasn't able to stand up for myself. I was gradually being brainwashed into believing that my feelings didn't matter. I had once been a confident, loud, and opinionated woman, but I became a shadow of my former self. And I saw a similar dynamic in the gender movement. Men were demanding that women be kind while trampling over their feelings. Men were dominating the movement while women were being made invisible, forced to submit to their wishes. And when women expressed their thoughts and feelings, they were met with abuse, threats, and sometimes actual real life consequences like being fired, sued, physically attacked. And as a result, many women censored themselves. I began to pay attention to the role of language and realizing the effect that it had on my thinking. And I began questioning every single term and every word that I didn't properly understand. So all those words that I put in air quotes before, but that I was expected to accept on faith. To quote George Orwell, if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. He warned of the dangers of accepting ideological language and being forced to lie. Your thinking doesn't only influence your language, but your language also influences your thinking. So if you're forced or coerced or groomed into using certain language, that will eventually change the way you think. Now, Bara Kerr, in her article, which I hope you know and have read, otherwise please read it, called Pronouns Are Rohypnol, she describes this phenomenon in a very compelling way with regard to gender. She argues that the use of preferred pronouns is much more than a simple courtesy. It creates a conflict in your mind between what your eyes see and what you are expected to say. Kind of a short circuit in a way. It confuses us, it distracts us, and it makes us less alert. It removes our defensive instincts. And that's exactly what it's meant to do. This is what Bara Kerr argues. Women tend to be alert around men, but relaxed around women. And when we're convinced that a man really is a woman, we lower our defenses and we become more vulnerable. And this is mirrored in another quote by George Orwell. This invasion of one's mind by ready-made phrases can only be prevented if one is constantly on guard against them. And every such phrase anesthetizes a portion of one's brain. Now, the constant repetition of the ready-made phrase, trans women are women, has this effect. We are told we should not be on guard against men who say they are women because they are women. They pose no threat to us. Our instinctive reflexes are put to rest. Now, forcing people to deny the evidence of their own eyes or accept a lie as truth is a common tactic under totalitarian regimes. Hannah Arendt wrote about this in her work, The Origins of Totalitarianism, and I quote, "The ideal subject of totalitarianism is people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists." Now, the goal of this forced change in language is not to be respectful or inclusive of a small minority. It is not a request for kindness. It is to remove our ability to distinguish truth from fiction, and even to make us indifferent to it. It will make us easy subjects to subjugate. You may think you're not living under a totalitarian regime, you have free speech, you live in a democracy, but free speech and democracy, like women's rights, are things that have to be fought and defended constantly. We are seeing that in many countries around the world. The notion of gender identity has been or is being enshrined in law. The language of gender ideology is used by the media. Male murderers, rapists, and pedophiles are referred to as women without even the qualifier of transgender. In some countries, it's considered a hate crime to refer to men who claim to be women as men. In New York City, employers can be fined up to $250,000 for not using an employee's preferred pronouns. The big Tech companies are policing the language of their users by banning them en masse from their platforms. Universities have fired professors for refusing to use compelled language. Political parties and politicians openly condemn and harass people even who refuse to get in line. Ministries train their staff in newspeak, to use an Orwellian term. Children are taught in primary school about words they should and shouldn't use when it comes to gender issues. Free speech, democracy, women's rights, they are not a given in any country. Institutional capture has allowed this ideology to permeate all spheres of society. Feminist and lesbian spaces have either disappeared, been invaded by men, or gone underground. Women's and LGBT organizations are forced to embrace gender ideology and its language in order to secure government funding, as Inge also mentioned. And so we see this compelled language being repeated by all those different actors, even the ones who are supposed to be on our side. So even rape shelters are repeating this ready-made phrase, trans women are women. It's gaslighting of the highest degree, and every time it is said, it anesthetizes a part of our brain. The effect of banning women from calling ourselves women is effectively silencing us. If we cannot speak of our experiences, we cannot stand up for our rights. And currently, we're only allowed to use the word women if it includes men. If we refer only to women, we are forced to use words like uterus haver, menstruator, or other demeaning terms. At the same time, some men claim to have a uterus, to have periods, to be able to get pregnant. In other words, there are no words left that exclusively refer to women. Every single word women have come up with to describe ourselves as a separate class to men has been claimed by men. Woman-born woman, natal woman, biological woman, adult human female, and even cis woman. All of them are being claimed by men. The goal is not to change language. The goal is not to become more inclusive. The goal is to silence women entirely. Now, to end on a positive note, there is hope. More women and men are daring to speak out about this. There are new organizations that are being created to stand up for women, like WHRC. But we still have a long way to go to undo this institutional capture that has taken decades to build. And until we are able to reestablish free speech and call ourselves women again, how can we counter the language that we are forced to use? Now, I've written down, I've made a short list of a few things that we can do. One, be aware. Don't repeat ready-made phrases unthinkingly. And that also applies to ready-made phrases from like-minded people. So stay critical. Ask yourself what the words you use really mean. Is a trans woman a woman? Is a trans man a man? If so, what do you think woman and man means? What do you mean by trans-identified male? What is trans? How do you define that? What does it mean to identify as female or male? What does transitioning and detransitioning mean? Transitioning from what to what? And what does it mean to live as a woman? So question yourself. Secondly, be creative. Create your own language using regular words to replace ideologically charged language. For example, a trans woman could be a man who claims to be a woman, or a man pretending to be a woman, or simply a man. Preferred pronouns could be pronouns designating the opposite sex. 3, be inquisitive. Learn, read, get informed. Fourthly, be kind. The world needs more kindness. Think what that means to you. Is it kind for people to ask you to lie? Is it kind to stand up for girls and women? Can you find a way to treat others with respect and sensitivity without being submissive? And most of all, be kind to yourselves. 5, very important, be woman-centered. Put women first, always. And lastly, be brave. Courage calls to courage. Many women have stood up and taken risks for the truth. Honor them and speak out too. And we will win this fight.